But Judas, who was also called Maccabeus, and his companions, secretly entered the villages and summoned their kinsmen, and enlisted those who had continued in the Jewish faith, and so they gathered about 6,000 men. They begged the Lord to look upon the people who were oppressed by all, and to have pity on the temple, which had been profaned by ungodly men, and to have mercy on the city which was being destroyed and about to be leveled to the ground, and to heed the blood that cried out to him, and to remember also the lawless destruction of the innocent babies, and the blasphemies committed against his name, and to show his hatred of evil. As soon as Maccabeus got his army organized, the Gentiles could not withstand him, for the wrath of the Lord had turned to mercy. Coming without warning, he would set fire to towns and villages. He captured strategic positions and put to flight not a few of the enemy. He found the nights most advantageous for such attacks, and talk of his valor spread everywhere. When Philip saw that the man was gaining ground little by little, and that he was pushing ahead with more frequent successes, he wrote to Ptolemy, the governor of Cilicia and Phoenicia, for aid to the king's government. And Ptolemy promptly appointed Nicanor, the son of Patroclus, one of the king's chief friends, and sent him in command of no fewer than 20,000 Gentiles of all nations to wipe out the whole race of Judea. He associated with him Gorgias, a general and a man of experience in military service. Nicanor determined to make up for the king the tribute due to the Romans, 2,000 talents, by selling the captured Jews into slavery. And he immediately sent to the cities on the seacoast, inviting them to buy Jewish slaves and promising to hand over 90 slaves for a talent, not expecting the judgment from the Almighty that was about to overtake him. Word came to Judah concerning Nicanor's invasion, and when he told his companions of the arrival of the army, those who were cowardly and distrustful of God's justice ran off and got away. Others sold all their remaining property, and at the same time begged the Lord to rescue those who had been sold by the ungodly Nicanor before he ever met them, if not for their own sake, yet for the sake of the covenants made with their fathers, and because he had called them by his holy and glorious name. But Maccabeus gathered his men together to the number of 6,000, and exhorted them not to be frightened by the enemy, and not to fear the great multitude of Gentiles who were wickedly coming against them, but to fight nobly, keeping before their eyes the lawless outrage which the Gentiles had committed against the holy place, and the torture of the derided city, and besides the overthrow of their ancestral way of life. For they trust to arms and acts of daring, he said, but we trust in the Almighty God, who is able with a single nod to strike down those who are coming against us and even the whole world. Moreover, he told them of the times when the help came to their ancestors, both the time of Sennacherib, when 185,000 perished, and the time of the battle with the Galatians that took place in Babylonia, when 8,000 in all went into the affair, with 4,000 Macedonians. And when the Macedonians were hard pressed, the 8,000, by the help that came to them from heaven, destroyed 120,000 and took much booty. With these words he filled them with good courage, and made them ready to die for their laws and their country. Then he divided his army into 4 parts. He appointed his brothers also, Simon and Joseph and Jonathan, each to command a division, putting 1,500 men under each. Besides, he appointed Eleazar to read aloud from the holy book, and gave the watchword, God's help. Then, leading the first division himself, he joined battle with Nicanor. With the Almighty as their ally, they slew more than 9,000 of the enemy, and wounded and disabled most of Nicanor's army, and forced them all to flee. They captured the money of those who had come to buy them as slaves. After pursuing them for some distance, they were obliged to return because the hour was late. For it was the day before the Sabbath, and for that reason they did not continue their pursuit. And when they had collected the arms of the enemy and stripped them off their spoils, they kept the Sabbath, giving great praise and thanks to the Lord, who had preserved them for that day and allotted it to them as the beginning of mercy. After the Sabbath, they gave some of the spoils to those who had been tortured, and to the widows and orphans, and distributed the rest among themselves and their children. When they had done this, they made common supplication and begged the merciful Lord to be wholly reconciled with his servants. In encounters with the forces of Timothy and Bacchides, they killed more than 20,000 of them and got possession of some exceedingly high strongholds, and they divided very much plunder, giving to those who had been tortured, and to the orphans and widows, and also to the aged, shares equal to their own. Collecting the arms of the enemy, they stored them all carefully in strategic places, and carried the rest of the spoils to Jerusalem. They killed the commander of Timothy's forces, a most unholy man, and one who had greatly troubled the Jews. While they were celebrating the victory in the city of their fathers, they burned those who had set fire to the sacred gates, Callisthenes and some others who had fled into one little house, so these received the proper recompense for their impiety. The thrice accursed Nicanor, who had brought the 1,000 merchants to buy the Jews, having been humbled with the help of the Lord by opponents whom they regarded as of the least account, took off his splendid uniform and made his way alone like a runaway slave across the country till he reached Antioch, having succeeded chiefly in the destruction of his own army. Thus he who had undertaken to secure tribute for the Romans by the capture of the people of Jerusalem proclaimed that the Jews had a defender, and that therefore the Jews were invulnerable, because they followed the laws ordained by him. About that time, as it happened, Antiochus had retreated in disorder from the region of Persia, for he had entered the city called Persepolis, and attempted to rob the temples and control the city. Therefore the people rushed to the rescue with arms, and Antiochus and his men were defeated, with the result that Antiochus was put to flight by the inhabitants and beat a shameful retreat. While he was at Ecbatana, news came to him of what had happened to Nicanor and the forces of Timothy. Transported with rage, he conceived the idea of turning upon the Jews the injury done by those who had put him to flight. So he ordered his charioteer to drive without stopping until he completed the journey. But the judgment of heaven rode with him. For in his arrogance he said, "When I get there, I will make Jerusalem a cemetery of Jews." But the all-seeing Lord, the God of Israel, struck him an incurable and unseen blow. As soon as he ceased speaking, he was seized with a pain in his bowels for which there was no relief, and with sharp internal tortures, and that very justly, for he had tortured the bowels of others with many and strange inflictions. Yet he did not in any way stop his insolence, but was even more filled with arrogance, breathing fire in his rage against the Jews, and giving orders to hasten the journey. And so it came about that he fell out of his chariot as it was rushing along, and the fall was so hard as to torture every limb of his body. Thus he who had just been thinking that he could command the waves of the sea in his superhuman arrogance, and imagining that he could weigh the high mountains in a balance, was brought down to earth and carried in a litter, making the power of God manifest to all. And so the ungodly man's body swarmed with worms, and while he was still living in anguish and pain, his flesh rotted away, and because of his stench, the whole army felt revulsion at his decay. Because of his intolerable stench, no one was able to carry the man, who had a little while before had thought that he could touch the stars of heaven. Then it was that, broken in spirit, he began to lose much of his arrogance, and to come to his senses under the scourge of God, for he was tortured with pain every moment. And when he could not endure his own stench, he uttered these words, "It is right to be subject to God, and no mortal should think that he is equal to God." Then the abominable fellow made a vow to the Lord, who would no longer have mercy on him, stating that the holy city, which he was hastening to level to the ground and to make a cemetery, he was now declaring to be free, and the Jews, whom he had not considered worth burying, but had planned to throw out with their children to the beasts, for the birds to pick, he would make all of them equal to citizens of Athens. And the holy sanctuary, which he had formerly plundered, he would adorn with the finest offerings, and the holy vessels he would give back, all of them, many times over, and the expenses incurred for the sacrifices he would provide from his own revenues. And in addition to all this, he would also become a Jew, and would visit inhabited places to proclaim the power of God. But when his sufferings did not in any way abate, for the judgment of God had justly come upon him, he gave up all hope for himself, and wrote to the Jews the following letter, in the form of a supplication. This was its content. To his worthy Jewish citizens, Antiochus their king and general sends hearty greetings and good wishes for their health and prosperity. If you and your children are well, and your affairs are as you wish, I am glad. As my hope is in heaven, I remember with affection your esteem and goodwill. On my way back from the region of Persia, I suffered an annoying illness, and I have deemed it necessary to take thought for the general security of all. I do not despair of my condition, for I have good hope of recovering from my illness. But I observed that my father, on the occasions when he made expeditions into the upper country, appointed his successor, so that if anything unexpected happened, or any unwelcome news came, the people throughout the realm would not be troubled, for they would know to whom my covenant was left. Moreover, I understand how the princes along the borders and the neighbors to my kingdom keep watching for opportunities and waiting to see what will happen. For I have appointed my son Antiochus to be king, whom I have often entrusted and commended to most of you when I hastened off to the upper provinces, and I have written to him what is written here. I therefore urge and beg you to remember the public and private services rendered to you, and to maintain your present goodwill, each of you, toward me and my son, for I am sure that he will follow my policy and will treat you with moderation and kindness. So the murderer and blasphemer, having endured the more intense suffering, such as he had inflicted on others, came to the end of his life by a most pitiable fate among the mountains in a strange land. And Philip, one of his courtiers, took his body home. Then, fearing the son of Antiochus, he betook himself to Ptolemy Philometor in Egypt. Upon my bed by night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he gave no answer. I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. The watchmen found me, as they went about in the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed them, when I found him whom my soul loves. I helped him, and would not let him go, until I had brought him into my mother's house, and into the chambers of her that conceived me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the deer of the field, that you stir not up nor awaken love until it please. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his splendor. And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk the wine of her impure passion, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich with the wealth of her wantonness. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues, for her sins are heaped high in heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her as she herself has rendered, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double draught for her in the cup she mixed, as she glorified herself and played the wanton. So give her like measure in torment and mourning. Since in her heart she says, A queen I sit, I am no widow, mourning I shall never see. So shall her plagues come in a single day, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she shall be burned with fire. For mighty is the Lord, God who judges her. And the kings of the earth, who committed fornication and were wanton with her, will keep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, in 1 hour has your judgment come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo any more, cargo of gold, silver, jewels, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, all kinds of scented wood, all articles of ivory, all articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and slaves, that is, human souls. The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendor are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares, who gained wealth from her, will stand far off, in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls. In 1 hour all this wealth has been laid waste, and all shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors, and all whose trade is on the sea, stood far off, and cried out loud as they saw the smoke of her burning. What city was like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, for the great city, where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. In 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, O saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So shall Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, and shall be found no more. And the sound of harpists and minstrels, of flute players and trumpeters, shall be heard in you no more. And a craftsman of any craft shall be found in you no more. And the sound of the millstone shall be heard in you no more. And the light of a lamp shall shine in you no more. And the voice of bridegroom and bride shall be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and of all who have been slain on earth. St. Thomas Aquinas believed that the Song of Solomon was the most profound book of the Old Testament, and that the book of Revelation was the most profound in the New Testament. The Song of Solomon portrays the romance and love of a man and woman who in Jewish and Christian tradition represent the spousal love that God has for Israel. Revelation climaxes with the wedding feast of the Lamb with the church. Both books take up the topic of God's intense spousal love for us. The language of desire that the woman speaks for her beloved illustrates this well. She passionately seeks him whom my soul loves. This echoes the language of love given in Deuteronomy's Shema, the prayer par excellence in Israel's scriptures, where we are called to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. The woman, by employing the language of prayerful love in the Shema, models the love of the bride of Christ, the church, who should always seek to find and please him whom my soul loves. The power and intimacy of love between a bride and a bridegroom, their passionate desiring of each other, are signposts for the love and intimacy each of us is invited to share with God. How can you love God with passion and deep desiring in your heart and soul?